The culture war that's roiled America for the past 2 decades will end when Christians decide to win. And President Trump just gave us a powerful tool for reconquering the country, beginning with our schools. I'm Hayden Ludwig, and welcome to Restoration Spotlight. There's a secret weapon buried in Trump's famous One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed last summer. Few know anything about it, but if used by just 100,000 families, a fraction of those with kids in private Christian schools, it would redirect $500 million away from government schools and keep students out of the left's clutches. It's what our guest today calls a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to save the next generation, and you heard it here first. His name is Aaron Baer, president of the Center for Christian Virtue, and you won't want to miss his good news. Aaron, thanks for joining Restoration Spotlight.
Hey, great to be with you.
So much of the left's power comes from its control of the institutions, the most important of which is arguably our schools, which are totally in the hands of the teachers' unions. No surprises here. Leftists typically don't have children. They take our children because we've largely let them. It may not have been clear in 1995, but that's as obvious as daylight today. For some families, of course, the answer is going to be homeschool our kids. But that's not going to work for everyone. So with that in mind, Aaron, you've honed in on the most effective tactic for taking back education, and that's redirecting money from government schools and sending it to private Christian schools. Walk us through that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the reason you see today. While, you have President Trump in the White House, you have conservatives control the Senate and Congress, but I don't actually think the left is completely losing their minds right now, because they know in the vast majority of the country, they have 90% of the next generation in their public schools, right? We have to ask ourselves when we see something like what just happened in New York City, where Zohran Mamdani got 78% of the vote under 30, when what he is selling is some perverted evil form of Islamism and communism, all kind of morphed in one. And any place you go where you find either a Muslim-run country or a communist-run country, you see massive oppression and massive poverty and failure. How does that happen where 78%, 80% of those under 30 go for it? Well, it's because it's what the public education system has produced in America today. Right. So if we really want to be serious about saving our country, what we have to do is reform the education system. And it's not just enough. I think this is the hardest part about this, Hayden, is it's not just enough to save our kids. We have to, and this is a fundamental Christian ideal. We need to care about everybody, right? Everybody is made in the image of God. Everybody deserves a quality education. And that's what this is all about. And that's what we're doing here at CCV and our Christian Education Network all over the country.
Okay, so let's get into specifics here. I'm completely in agreement with you here. There's going to be a public education system, whether we homeschool our kids or anything like that. We need to have a robust private Christian education system, but we also need to have Christian influence over these public schools here. In other words, there should be no way to escape the Christian influence on education, just the same way that the left understands there should be no way to escape the progressive influence on the next generation. Now, we're talking here specifics about Trump's new tax credit to families to help redirect some of the money here. So explain from the 30,000-foot view what that tax credit is, because probably most people listening have never heard about it, and we'll start to get into some more specifics and how people actually apply for that. So let's start at the beginning here.
Yeah, so what's one of the amazing things in this One Big Beautiful Bill, I think, that has gone really overlooked and actually might be the most impactful thing included in this bill. And that says a lot, because there are a lot of great things in this bill,
does.
Right? The extension of the tax credits, funding of the border wall, the work requirements on Medicaid, defunding Planned Parenthood, defunding the corporate, National Broadcast Association, those types of things. All amazing things. But quite frankly, what might be the biggest provision is the first ever national school choice tax credit. Now, for your listeners in about 20 states, 19 states, only about 16 of those states are actually using the program right now. They'll be very familiar with the concept of what was put into the One Big Beautiful Bill, and that's a federal school choice dollar for dollar tax credit. And I know as soon as somebody brings up tax credit or taxes, your eyes gloss over. But hang with me, because this is actually there's no way of talking about without saying that this is the biggest evangelism opportunity in American history and our best shot to ever fix education in America. How this program works is that an individual family can make what will likely be a $3,400 donation to a scholarship granting organization, SGO. That SGO collects all of these donations, all of these $3,400 donation per household, and then awards scholarships to kids to attend private schools, Christian schools, any type of private school, right? In return, the IRS gives a dollar for dollar tax credit back to the family, right? So a family makes a $3,400 donation and they get $3,400 back from the IRS as long as they have $3,400 in liability in their federal income tax, which the vast majority of families would. So
can I pause you to clarify for a second? So these are people who are already going to spend that money. So this is, you may be teetering on the edge. Oh, I just wish I had an extra $4,000 to put into this, right? But maybe you've already dedicated yourself. Okay, I'm already going to put my child through this private school. You're saying it's a reward for that kind of behavior because now I can write that off the top of my taxes. And when you say dollar for dollar, it's not 80% of the $3,400. It's $3,400 right off the top.
It's not a deduction. It's like you said, it's not like giving a donation to a standard 501c3 where you get about 30% deduction or things like that on a certain amount of income. This is a full tax credit, right? So you write $3,400. And the other way of looking at this, Hayden, is you're basically redirecting your federal income tax dollars. You have to pay this money one way or the other. So do you want to give it to the federal government or do you want to give it to a kid to be able to attend a Christian school?
Brilliant.
And let me just say, when this program was first put into the Senate version of the One Big Beautiful Bill, it was a $10 billion program. At the last moment, Trump took the cap off it. So we're literally talking about potentially tens of billions of dollars of private dollars, actually, right? Because this money never goes to the government. This is always private donations of private dollars that are going to be unleashed to be able to get kids into Christian schools. Now, every kid is going to be able to afford a private Christian school if they want it, and if the church, if Christians get on mission to free that next generation. And let me just say here, hey, this is why when we talk about the systematic problems in the public schools, this is where it starts to fix them. Because you're absolutely right. Public schools are always going to be with us. But as of right now, there are no forces on the public schools to make them any better, right?
Yes.
When public schools fail, they get more money. When private schools fail, they shut down. When a business is failing, it shuts down, right? When public schools fail, they get more money. That's why in places like the city of Columbus, we have some schools here that have like a 6% passage rate on the third grade reading proficiency test. Yet they're getting $25,000 per kid. It's absolutely unsustainable. And this is the opportunity for us to actually do something about it.
So just so people, because people may never have heard of this, because you mentioned earlier, only 16 states are really actively doing this on a state level right now. So I want to lay out some of the significance here. So this is going on in places like Ohio, where you're active right now. And I do want to talk about this specific program there. But now what you have is a federal equivalent that's being opened up, at least theoretically, to everybody, regardless of where you live. I realize there's some restrictions we'll get into here. But fundamentally, this is taking a program that's already borne great fruit in certain conservative states and saying, let's see what happens if we take the cap off, right? So we don't limit it to any billions of dollars. It could go as big as it gets. And we try this everywhere. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And the reality is, it just makes sense because we have a one-size-fits-all education system in America right now, right? We just push everybody into the public schools functionally. This is actually bringing real competition to this space to allow families to pick an education that best meets their needs. And again, this is where I say, as Christians, one of our very first missions in America, right? The reason we actually have public schools today was that Christians said, it's important that people can read themselves so they can read the Bible, right? That's right. The Christians that actually founded Ohio. They founded a state in our Constitution that says religion, morality, and knowledge are essential for good governance. And so we created this system of public schools that was really founded so kids can learn to read the Bible, especially. That's all been forced out over these years. And the only way we're going to get it back is if we bring competition to this space.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, your critics are going to say you're just robbing public schools of that valuable $25,000 that we're using to continue a failing public education system. And you're also propping up, religion, separation of church and state. Aaron, how do you counter these arguments?
Well, number one, we say, you guys are idiots and you're failing kids in the first place.
End of story, right there.
I'm just sorry. Yeah, there's just a piece of this where we've taken the public schools and their teachers unions at face value for so long, and who's actually been suffering are the children of America, right? When you see the National Assessment on Education Progress shows that 70% of fourth graders in America aren't proficient in reading, like, I don't have time anymore to just be friendly to protect some teachers unions' feelings. We've got kids to save. We can't mess around it. However, let's just go down this path. First and foremost, with this program, we are allowing parents to choose the best environment for them, right? Nobody is being forced into a Christian school whatsoever. So nobody can say the government is violating their First Amendment rights of religious freedom. That's just nonsensical. If what so happens is that there's a church on the corner that started a school like the schools we've started in Ohio, and it's outperforming the nearby public schools, and families say, hey, I'd rather go to the Christian school because they have discipline and my kids are actually learning there and it's a safe environment. Hey, that's just the free market working. There's nothing in terms of me forcing my religion on people. But the other thing is, we just have to be honest. We've gone down the government school experiment so far, and it is fundamentally failing, right? And the only thing the public schools say is we need more money. That's their only answer, right? But again, let's just take Columbus City Schools, for example, here in Columbus, Ohio, and they're just a perfect case study for the rest of the country. In 2015, the public schools got about $14,000 per kid. Columbus City Schools got about $14,000 per kid. This year, they got $25,000 per kid, right?
Wow.
And actually, what we found in Columbus City School is enrollment has dipped by 8% and hiring has gone up by 11%, right? So we're hiring more people, we're spending more money, and the results are getting worse. And why is that? Well, because our public schools are more concerned with DEI and social emotional learning than they are with actually kids learning to read. And by the way, we also have a message. Instead of telling kids that our country is irreparably racist and we're going to be you're going to be downtrodden your whole life because you're a victim and there's nothing you can do. Christian schools are actually bringing a message of hope that you were made in the image of God, who loves you so much that he sent his only son to die for you, and you are an infinite value. That's the message that we have, and that's the opportunity that we have here.
Well, you mentioned earlier that Ohio was founded by Christians. Every state in the union is founded by Christians. There's nothing inappropriate about a country settled by Christians encouraging Christian education and formation. In fact, it's the only thing they ought to be doing. That doesn't preclude
it's people. It's the only reason why we care about it.
Yeah. That's exactly right. But fundamentally, this is not an Islamic country, and everybody understands that. It's why we can recognize Saudi Arabia is an Islamic country, and they look back on us and say, yeah, you're a Christian country. Even if all the people don't necessarily agree on that, it's very obvious you're coming from the fruits of different ideas. Kind of stick with this idea, though, Aaron. So it is remarkable when this law is coming into effect. We go back to COVID just a few years ago. Christian education has been gaining ground, since the 1960s, but COVID really exploded that trajectory exponentially up. Homeschooling rates have doubled. Private Christian and religious education is up at least 34%, and those are older numbers that I found. I'm sure it's even higher now. Do you see this as a one-off gain that'll kind of taper off, or is this really what we're witnessing, some kind of exodus out of the failing government schools and into these grand alternatives that you're laying out?
Yeah, Hayden, this is probably the most important question of everything we're talking about right now, because I think everybody recognizes that the way American culture tends to function is through cycles, right? And so you get something happens and people react and there's sort of some big wave. And then quite frankly, that goes away and the next topic comes up, right?
Yes.
And so, there's a mass shooting. And so everyone's talking about gun issues or there's, some big issue around abortion or some big issue around transgenderism or whatever. And everyone gets excited and everybody responds to it. And then it just kind of tapers off, right?
The news cycle, in other words. Yes.
The news cycle. That's exactly right, right? The reality, this is why I'm so excited about this federal school choice tax credit, is this is what allows us to take this moment we had with COVID that we're kind of on the tail end of right now and turn it into a movement, right? Turn this into something that endures and that we have to have because America is fundamentally run by institutions. And so this is the reason why our country is in such dire shape, is that the only institution that's driving education predominantly on mass scale is the public schools, is the government schools. We have the opportunity now to build a entirely new set of institutions that are bringing accountability and transparency and competition to the education space. So if we can actually do that and get, a third or half of the kids in America into an alternative type of school, that's going to put such real pressure on the public schools to perform better, right? And to drop the woke nonsense. Yeah, the wokesters are always going to be with us, right? I think about this every time I read the scriptures where Jesus talks about the poor will always be with you. There's always going to be sin. There's always going to be brokenness, all of that kind of stuff. But we can actually do so much better by building a whole new type of education system to bring pressure to bear on the public schools and save kids today.
Yeah, it's a clever grand strategy, I think, not to hit the enemy where he's strongest, but make him fight in multiple fronts. I always think of like the Pacific War, for instance. We didn't go straight into all the Japanese strongholds. They spent months building up and fortifying. We sailed around them, took the fight somewhere else, weakened them. If you try to hit the left on its own turf that they've controlled for the better part of a century, you're likely to lose. You still want to win those battles, but you've got to start by dividing their forces and make them fight on your turf where you're more likely to win. It's a very clever strategy.
Well, and Hayden, this is probably going to be the thing that I hope I don't offend too many of our listeners here. But
please,
what
go
you
ahead.
just described
I want to hear it.
is why the school board strategy has been a losing battle for the last 50 years.
Interesting.
Listen, if somebody feels called to run for school board, they should absolutely run for school board. We need good school board members, all of those types of things. But we have been fighting that battle in the same way for 50 years, and we are systematically losing. And I will tell you, it's because that's the battle the public schools and the teachers unions want us to fight. That is their territory. Right? Again, I'm just going to use Ohio as a microcosm because Ohio is the bellwether state. When I was working in Arizona, it was the same way. It's the same way all over the country. But we have 600 school districts, 611 public school districts in Ohio. Let's say each school district has 5 school board members, right? So that's over 3,000 school board members right there. That's a lot of school board races to run in, right? It's actually really expensive relatively to run a school board race. So if we were to systematically go and try to fight all of those races, we just can't, right?
Yes.
You know who has the money to do that? The teachers unions, right? So I remember in 2022, there was that, speaking of news cycles, there was that big push of conservatives getting involved in school board races. And we had more money, we had more energy going into those school board races than ever before. And we probably won about a third of the races that folks got involved in all over the country. Most of those folks aren't even there today. But let's take it one degree further here, Hayden. Let's say I actually could replace all 3,000 school board members with strong conservative Christians in America today. The net effect would be far less than most people know because the school districts aren't actually run by the school boards. They're run by the Marxist teachers and teachers unions and the folks at the heads of the school districts, right? The actual teachers are even a lot of your Christian teachers. Like we deal with this right now, trying to hire teachers into Christian schools. If you went through the university system to to become a teacher, the way Ohio State or Oklahoma or ASU, whatever, the predominant pedagogy of those schools is to teach teachers to explain the world through a critical theory lens. So it's not even, this was our whole talk about when critical race theory was being taught in public schools. The teachers unions would come back like, oh, no, we're not teaching critical race theory. And we were like, no, we're not saying you're getting up in front of second graders and say, let me tell you about Herbert Marcuse and Kimberly Crenshaw.
Right.
No, they were just explaining the world. Here's the systematic racism that happened in America.
Did you know you've been oppressed? Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
That's the problem. And so unless we reform the entire system, winning one school board race, hey, if somebody feels called to it, do it. I'm not going to tell you not to. But we have to recognize that's not a systematic strategy to save the system.
Well, it also kind of explains too, on just a philosophical level, like kind of like going there too, God didn't create public schools. He created the family and the church. And it's understood if Paul the Apostle would talk about the paideia, right, of bringing up our children into the Athenian civic culture that he was writing to the people he was speaking with. He baptized that and turned that into Christian civic, but really global culture, right, that honors your mother and father and honors the God who is the God of my family, yes, me also, but also the nation that I'm part of here. That idea has never left. That's still how Christians ought to think. And I think it has been a big, huge problem for us that maybe it's not impossible for there to be Christian public schools, but the idea that the government who's put in charge of killing people and building roads should be raising your children for you, that's hugely problematic instead of you, the father or the mother.
Well, Hayden, I think this is, to me, the most important point that I even think within the church, we've surrendered this ground, right? We have accepted the idea that there is this sacred secular divide, right? There's our moral beliefs about God and about what's right and wrong and things like that. And then there's these secular beliefs about math and physics, history and facts and things like that. When no, God created all of it, right? So we even see this in Romans. The natural world reveals God's glory, right? God's moral law is as relevant and as real as his natural law, right? And his laws of gravity and things like that. And it doesn't make sense. This is one of these things we're big believers of here, is that you can't have a true education that's not a Christian education, because you can't really understand the world unless you understand who made it and what you were made for. I mean, that's the systematic question behind the whole trans debate today and the gender identity debate is who am I and what was I made for? And the world doesn't have an answer for that, and that's why you see mass confusion. And so this to me, again, is what you just described about Paul. Like, it's the reason why Paul was going into all of these places and reasoning, because he was like, hey, you guys think you understand the world, but you don't, because you don't know who made it. So let me tell you about the guy who actually created the world and created you. That's so central to our message. And it's the reason why America is the most prosperous country in world history, is because we were founded as a nation that understood who made us and what he made us for.
Yeah, that's right. Going back to the Trump tax credit for a moment, this is one more example of a very clever and sound and biblically just good idea that comes out of red states like Ohio, that's been tried and tested and reformed and tweaked and is now moving up and scaled up to the entire country. But it's not yet going to affect every state equally. So let's talk about people who live in a place like Colorado or California. Will they have access to this credit? And incidentally, I don't think we mentioned it. When does this credit come online? When can you begin receiving it back from the IRS, in other words?
Yeah, claiming it. Yeah. That will be January 1, 2027. That's when the actual program goes into effect. And so right now you have groups like us that are getting ready to establish scholarship granting organizations all over the country to help folks be able to claim these tax credits and then award scholarships to kids. What was one of the bummers in the actual bill when we ended was the parliamentarian at the last moment in the Senate said that states were going to have to opt into the program in order for SGOs to operate there, right? So by our estimation, we're expecting that to be somewhere around 30 states, right? There's about 27 Republican-run states. Like a governor is going to have to be the one to opt in. There's about 27 Republican-run states. There's about 3 to 5 Democrat states. We think we'll have a shot to get them to authorize the program in. But unfortunately, like you just mentioned, California, Colorado, we don't see them opting in. Now, 2 things I'd say there. First off, for people who live in California and Colorado or Illinois, whatever states, they can still write donations to SGOs in other states, right? So they can still redirect their tax dollars to Christian education as opposed to sending it to the federal government. They just won't be able to benefit from the Christian schools in their state won't be able to benefit from it. But the other thing is, we're going to get another crack at this to repeal the requirement that states opt in. It makes no sense that states have to be able to opt into this program. There's, you didn't have to have states opt into the Trump tax credits. You didn't have to have states opt into all of these other things. For some reason, the parliamentarian, who I'm quite frustrated with, I think they need to fire her. But the parliamentarian added this requirement in, which is pure policy, which they're not supposed to do. And our hope is that at the next reconciliation process, which they go through about once a year, they'll fix this in that and allow families in California, in every blue New York, every blue state to benefit from this. They too deserve to be able to give their families options as well.
Yes, that's right. Right. It's a good example of this is version 1.0. Version 2.0, you know exactly what you need to do better the next time, maybe even raise the amount that you can get. I like the fact that there's no sunset clause on this. We don't have to fight this battle over again in 4 years or 2 years or whatever.
Permanent law. Yep.
It's a permanent law. That's a massive part of this. And, people tend to look for silver bullet solutions. You'll never get one of those in a committee in Senate or the House, right? You know this very well from experience. But it also shows, it took a long time for us to decline into the situation we're at. Now, it won't take 80 years to fix some of these problems, but we need to be in it for the long haul. You recognized this earlier. This is not something Christians ought to try to fix now. In the short run, fix it all right now. You'll swallow on that and choke yourself on it. You need to be committed to teaching your children to have these ideas, this moral framework, so that they can pass it on to their children, This is how you rebuild a good, godly Christian nation. And you start with the thing right in front of you. And in your case, Aaron, this is the tax credit right in front of you. So, Aaron Baer, thank you so much for your time. You've given so much to think about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Hayden. Thank you for talking about this. I'm always shocked at how few folks actually are aware of this, but it's such an opportunity for us right now. So I appreciate you talking about this.
Thank you for coming on the show, sir. I'm Hayden Ludwig, and this is Restoration Spotlight, a project of Restoration News, your source of headline-smashing investigative journalism for the America First movement. Check us out at restoration-news.com, and until next time, stay vigilant and trust in God.